Hey, everybody, and welcome back to The Ground Up Show, the podcast that's hosted right from my dining room. I'm your host, Matt Diavella, and today I'm sitting down for a great conversation with experimental photographer, filmmaker, and fabricator Daniel DeArco. We talk about the future of technology in independent film, what things are worth sacrificing, and how to cultivate new passions. But first, if you've gotten some value from The Ground Up Show, if it's helped you on your journey, I would love it if you would consider contributing on Patreon. Patreon is a small community where I create exclusive videos on topics like lifestyle design, business, and filmmaking. It's one of the ways that I'm able to keep this YouTube channel 100% advertisement free. You can check it out at patreon.com/Matt Diavella. There's a link in the description. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show. All right, you ready to start a podcast?
Ready.
We're starting out with a little bit of background noise, which is totally fine. People might hear the light hum of landscaping next door, this is the second time it's happened on the podcast. But fingers crossed it goes away soon.
Bit of noise never hurt no one.
It never hurt no one. This is like the things that you go through as filmmakers and photographers, where there's always something that comes up. There's always something that will disrupt your shoot, problems that arise. And you either can fix them or you just deal with them and live with them.
Usually the latter. Yeah, for me, the biggest thing is wind. Wind has been my biggest thing because it'll knock over light stands or props, or it'll bother, models or something, or like people do hair and makeup and stuff. It like makes it go all crazy.
Oh, is a lot of your work outdoors then?
No, I mean, sometimes clients just want that. Like I'm doing a shoot tomorrow actually for a returning client, and same deal. It's going to be outdoors. So I'm just hoping it's not too windy.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So how about we start out, give me a little bit of introduction. So you're experimental photographer, filmmaker, YouTuber, fabricator. You're the first fabricator I've had on the podcast.
Yeah. So I know it's kind of a weird, sort of a bizarre hybrid anomaly, but basically I consider myself I've been a photographer for the past 7 years. But I've also been really big on fabrication and building stuff for the past 7 years too, and really hyperactive in that for the past 3-4 years. So I consider myself nowadays kind of more of a camera rig designer. Mm-hmm. So I like building stuff for my camera. Okay, and then I like using it for stuff.
So one of the things I saw was you said you had built one of the fastest sliders ever made, which is like really cool. It's one of those things you got to see to believe.
It's kind of dangerous.
Talk about that. Yeah, it looks like it. Talk about that a little bit, but also what other kind of stuff are you making for your camera rigs?
So I am really big on sort of getting into mechatronics, which is sort of robotics is a sort of subdivision of mechatronics, where you combine mechanical applications or mechanical things, designs with electronics. And so I've always been kind of nerding out about that. And so that's essentially what our cameras are, is sort of a product of mechatronics. And so I kind of built that as a fun little experiment because I wanted to see what could somebody do to kind of push slow motion to its limit, or just do something a little bit different. It wasn't really to challenge other people or to I didn't want the video to blow up per se, but I just wanted to do it for myself to see what would happen. So I had a GoPro. At the time I didn't have a GoPro 6. I think I had a GoPro Hero 5 or something like that. And I had this idea for using an industrial motor to sort of power this camera slider. So did exactly that. I programmed the industrial motor. It's a servo motor. And the rest is history. It was pretty fast, actually. I think it was something like 20 miles per hour.
Was it really?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I didn't do the calculations just because I was a little bit lazy.
Yeah.
And I was busy making the video. And then I think after I posted it, I think Petapixel, F-Stoppers, and maybe DP Review or something, they all shared it. And then this guy, maybe he's like a mathematician or something. He was like, oh, you calculate, he did the equation and he found that it was something like 20 miles per hour.
Right. And we're talking about over with a 2 feet, 3 feet slider?
A 5 foot slider.
A 5 foot slider, 20 miles an hour in less in like a split second, right?
Yeah. So it accelerated to that speed in 0.15 seconds.
It's kind of wild to think about technology like that by the time Like, no human could ever make something move like that in that way, because by the time it's starting, it's stopping, right? Like, it's happening so fast.
Well, the interesting thing is, and I don't want to dog anyone or like talk badly about sort of our industry because it's not a bad thing. But I just noticed as I started getting more into fabrication and like, you know, understanding manufacturing and everything, I started seeing the patterns that a lot of stuff that is applied in photography and filmmaking equipment has already been done. It's just been taken from other industries, sort of like robotics, for example. So when I saw other sort of linear actuators moving at that speed, I was like, oh, I just put a camera on there.
Right.
But no one kind of wanted to do that for cameras because I guess no one really put those two things together, like, oh, slow motion and super fast camera slider. But I saw like the Matrix a long time ago, and I was thinking, what if you could do that in sort of one shot instead of having 20 cameras staggered, you know, like that.
Yeah. Is there any specific technologies that you are most excited about? Like, I mean, you think about over the past 5 years with camera technology, it's kind of crazy that drones are as prevalent as they are, and gimbals are now changing the game when we had to use these manual sliders for so long, and now you can just put a camera on a gimbal. Obviously you have to manually balance a little bit, but what it can do and the functions that it can perform now on a tiny handheld rig would be impossible 5 years ago.
I think that industrial robotic arms are going to be a thing of the next 2 to 5 years. And I don't mean just in Hollywood productions, because they're certainly used in that. Sometimes they'll take a KUKA robot or a Fanuc robot, which is used mostly for car assemblies in factories, and then they'll actually just like paint it black or something, make it look really cool, and they'll put a camera in there. And so they have a couple of camera robots. I think one's called the Bolt, one's called, you know, something else.
It's a Glambot. I don't know if you heard of that
like
one.
5-axis ones, like something like that.
The one that is I had Cole Walliser, who's a commercial director, and he does like Emmy red carpet and stuff. But it's the Glambot, where it's like a robot arm, and then it's with a phantom camera on it, and it goes whoop, and then it does these split second moves in slow motion.
It's kind of like on a big slider itself, right?
Right, but it kind of can go up and down, and it's like I mean, the thing must cost like over $1 million.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Usually those types of robots for factories, I think they start at something like 25 or 50,000 starting.
Yeah,
and the ones who can lift things like cars, probably over $1 million, I think, or at least over $250,000. But definitely, I think those are going to be accessible to normal sort of prosumer filmmakers, probably in the next 2 to 5 years, I think. I actually want to build one myself in my garage, but we'll see what happens, because I have to learn a bit more about like the programming and what it takes to make it think. You know, what it takes to make it move the way I want it to. There's a lot of mechanical stuff about it that's complicated. That's why it's so expensive. But I think besides that, the gimbal technology is going to get so good to the point where it's, you know, what we had 5 years ago is going to be totally just obsolete. No manual anything anymore. It's kind of like skateboards, you know, like everyone has like the booster boards,
yeah. Which for those that don't know is just like an electrical skateboard.
Yep. Those just use like some kind of brushless DC motor, I think. But then it's funny, like they're using similar technologies for all these different applications. And in general, I think there's something called the Moore's Law, which is technology. It'll get better twice as fast per every 2 or 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
I might be quoting that wrong, but
it's exponential. Like if you look at from the early 1900s until now, it's just like
it's ridiculous,
a crazy hockey stick.
Yeah, I mean, looking back 5 years ago, I think a lot of people are still doing their own DIY sliders. And not like,
dude, I built my own out of PVC pipe and skateboard wheels.
Oh, we've all been there. I love that stuff. I love that stuff. And I love seeing that. And I think that you know, even 5 years ago though, the people who are doing DIY sliders, they weren't motorized in any way. So nowadays it's like you can buy that for $100, $200. So it's kind of crazy. I don't know. A little bit scary where things are going, but in a good way. Yeah, it's exciting too.
This stuff is cool. It doesn't really change your story. Does it?
It's not necessary.
Does it? It's not necessary. Does it help?
Depends on your vision, I think. Yeah. I think, what is it? I actually was watching a couple of clips of your previous podcasts. And then, one thing that Mango Street said about knowing exactly what you want is important, but also knowing exactly what you just do not need, period. Right? So it's they talked about lenses, for example. It's like, if you don't need a motorized slider, don't get one. You probably have more gear than I do. Ironically,
I probably do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
mean,
so.
I have 4 cameras.
Yeah.
Well, when you do a podcast, 3 camera setup, and I got all the lenses. I have 3 Metabones adapters.
Oh, jeez.
It's a massive amount of gear.
Yeah. Those adapters by themselves are what, like $700?
They're $400.
Okay.
I mean, this is one of the things with technology where it's like I went down investing in good glass with Canon, and then I never saw Sony coming through and producing amazing cameras and lenses.
Just happened, just out
so
of nowhere.
I'm probably I might end up switching over eventually, but it's one of those things where it's like I'm not going to rush into it. What I have now works well, but it's all about the purpose, right? And even though I'm a minimalist filmmaker, and for me, ideally, I would love to only have 1 camera, but the stuff that I do needs 3 cameras. Like I really want to. I have a vision for how I want to make this thing, so it requires those extra bits. And maybe that's what you're saying with a vision of having a motorized slider. You have this idea for this film that you want to create, and that shot that you want to get requires you to use this new technology.
Yeah, definitely for podcasting, you would need more than 1 camera, I guess. So it makes sense. I actually don't own a 3-axis gimbal. I don't own any gimbals at all. The funny thing is I had that super crazy fast camera slider, but I only used it for that video. I never actually really used it. I never had a motorized slider before that. So it was only not until recently where I got one, but I don't have a lot of stuff in general. Pretty minimal with the lighting too, and I only have 2 cameras. So in terms of having a vision for, I guess, the shots you want to create, this might sound kind of funny, but I get a lot of inspiration for cinematography from anime. And I'm not a big anime nerd or anything. I like some animes, not all of them. But the interesting thing is their illustrations, right? So the camera movements you see in those animes, they're not real movements. Like they're illustrated. So something traveling around a subject really fast is not possible with our current technology. So I kind of like seeing how I can manipulate things with electronics or camera rigs or something to make those things sort of generally more, I guess, attainable.
Well, when you even mention that, it makes me think of the one shot that you did with you have a permanent marker and you throw it up in the air and it flips, and then the camera spins around as the marker reaches the camera lens. And I think one of the things that, and I need you to break that down for me, but I think the thing that we do when we're making those kind of things is like, you want to make a cool shot. You want somebody to be like, it's kind of like magic, where they're like, how did you do that?
Totally.
Because when you're making a movie, all you see is the frame. And in essence, you can create your own magic within that frame, as corny as that sounds. But like you have a crew of 50 behind you. It might be a crew of 2 people. But like it doesn't matter what's behind you, how you orchestrate and pull the strings.
Sure.
What matters is how you can visually pull it off in that frame. So how did you do it?
So that was also a motorized thingy that I made. I actually want to make a video about that, rebuilding that rig pretty soon. I have a lot of plans for my channel. I've been MIA. I took a hiatus recently because there's been a lot of stuff going on in my personal life too. Like I'm not sure if I want to live in California. So considering possibly moving either to a different place in LA or just out of state or something. And also trying to replan videos for the channel. But that is one of the videos I wanted to do, was sort of actually showing a build for that. Because I could also use that build as sort of a base for a robotic arm or something later on, like repurpose it for something else. But yeah, it was essentially just like a thing that was sort of, it held my GoPro at a slight 45 angle like this, and then kind of offset. So when the pen reached here, it just circled around it like that, and then it went back down. It wasn't that hard to program or anything. It's just a simple,
right? But sometimes it's cool how like just a simple move like that. Is something that you're like, how do they do that? Because that wasn't handheld. That wasn't, I've never seen a slider built for that. And I think that's where like creativity and experimenting comes to play.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It seems like experimenting is a huge part of what you do. There is definitely the traditional safe path that people can take, especially as a photographer or filmmaker. Why'd you decide to tinker and experiment and push into these kind of places that other people haven't gone before?
Well, okay, so I only got into photography because I almost died. I had like a near-death experience where a lot of people don't know this, I guess. Well, family and friends know this, like close friends. But a lot of people on social media don't know that over 7-8 years ago, I was an acrobat. So I was a breakdancer for 7 years before that. And then I got into acrobatics and everything. And so there was basically an accident one day when I was training by myself, and then my head pretty much got severed from my body in a way, but it was held on because the SCM muscles here, and I had really big traps, so it was stabilizing my head from kind of tipping over. But my C4 and C5 were completely wrecked, and I had to go to the hospital, like one of the best hospitals in California. I think it's John Muir. They might be like one of the top 5 or something. And they had to get one of the best neurosurgeons to come out and then work on me. So he told me, he was like, yeah, I want to call you one full person, but your head isn't really connected rigidly to your body. It's sort of just stabilized there by your muscles. And so I was kind of thanking myself for being, really fit back then. I was a lot bigger back then. But at the same time, I kind of screwed myself over. So my dream before like all this stuff was to be in Cirque du Soleil and to be a traveling performing artist and all that stuff. They had to work on me for maybe 6 or 8 hours, re-put me back together. My neck is it's like 50% metal now. Wow. I think it's titanium, tantalum screws and plates in there. And they have what's called a bone graft. So they perform what's called spinal fusion, which is essentially this fake bone graft thing that goes in between your bones. And then your bones grow in and outside of it. So it fuses together. And, when I got back home, because I had to learn how to walk again and everything, like I lost all my muscle, it was just a crazy experience. And the whole story would take a while to tell.
How old were you when this happened?
I was 19.
Yeah.
So I'm 26 now. So that was 7 years ago? Almost? Mm-hmm. Almost 7 years. And yeah, the doctors told me, they said, Daniel, there was a kid who came in a year ago with this exact same injury and he died. So, when you get back home, it's time for you to move mountains and really think about what you want to do with your life. And I was just like, thank God, I almost died, what am I going to live for now? I was so depressed. And when I got back home, I was sitting there thinking, like, who am I? What do I want to do with myself? Because that was my dream. That was one thing I didn't want to give up, was being kind of like this performing artist, and I loved all that stuff. But if I were to do that for a company now, it'd be a liability. So I actually got back in shape about 6 months later on, miraculously, because, I shouldn't have been working out in general that same year. But I had a camera and I was thinking, I kind of just want to express myself and take pictures and explore my creative side again, because I was always making things as a kid. I think that career would have taken me away from creativity, because it was kind of splitting this way. Mm-hmm. So I picked up my camera, I just started experimenting, taking videos, shooting photos, all that stuff. And then I got super invested into it. But while I was taking pictures, I always had this curiosity about what happened to me. And I was thinking, what is a bone graft? Like, how is it made? How is it manufactured? Like, what kind of materials have to go into making these like titanium, bone grafts and like titanium screws? What's the manufacturing method? So I just started tinkering. I started like kind of behind the scenes outside of photography, like building stuff, getting into DIY, fabrication. Yeah, and then it just sort of fused eventually over time. Because I was building props and everything for my shoots too.
Well, what's amazing about that is that a lot of people think that you can only have one passion in life.
Right.
That, you're born to be a filmmaker, a baseball player, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out with that, then you're hopeless. And you can cultivate and create and find new passions. You just have to be open to it. Mm-hmm. How did your career progress as a photographer? Because it sounds like you were starting over. You had built up all these skills. You had put so much time into the craft of aerobatics, and then now you're going to start all over with a camera. And you said you were like a bit depressed at that time. Like,
I was super depressed.
How do you get out of that? Was it photography? Did that help you pull you out of it, or was it just life moving forward in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think experiences like that, they can cause a lot of subconscious trauma in a person. So for a long time, I was struggling with sort of like this alternate reality version of myself, where I was like, okay, I don't know what would happen if I didn't break my neck, but I'm on this path where clearly it did, so I got to figure things out. And so that kind of affected me for years and years and years. And I mean, for the most part, though, like it was motivation for me to push through, and it was inspiration for other people when they heard that story. So I wouldn't tell them unless they asked, but then when I did, they were like, I had no idea that happened to you. And I would tell them, yeah, so, like, cherish what you do. Just like, don't stop, keep creating, keep making new stuff. And for me, I guess that was a big motivation for pushing me towards photography. So I was pursuing that or started pursuing that 7 years ago. And yeah, it was just a big component to my life.
Yeah, from what I've seen and some of the videos I've watched online, it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't easy. It wasn't an overnight success in photography.
Yeah.
What were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome early on? I know you were working 3 jobs in college and trying to find time to even create and make something for yourself.
Yeah.
So how does someone go from that position to being able to be a full-time photographer?
The word obsession comes to mind. You have to actually lose sleep practicing, training yourself to do something, like researching it. And then over time, I guess that obsession, as it grows, you try to find innovative ways to get there. So as long as you have that, it's not really a sense of if it's going to happen. It's more like, what are you going to do creatively to make it happen? You obviously have to be talented too and like pretty good at what you do, and you have to get good if you're not good. Mm-hmm. But I feel as if you have that obsession with getting somewhere, you'll find some crazy way to get there.
Because there's not just this one template, this one way to be successful. There's
definitely not
an infinite number of ways, and you can really define it for yourself. You can really figure out and say, all right, well, it's not about making $1 million. It's about making a living.
Yeah.
Being able to pay the bills as a full-time photographer is a massive win.
100%.
Honestly,
yes.
like getting to that point, and this is what a lot of people in creative fields, I think, believe. You look at stand-up comedians. Being a stand-up comedian full-time, like, I think is way more challenging than photography.
That must be so hard. Yeah.
It's crazy. I've got a lot of friends that are in stand-up, and you have to really hustle, and it takes a while before you can get paying gigs. And when you get paying gigs, you're getting $50 for a show. You can't make $50 and every three nights a week you're making $50 at a show. It takes a very long time to build up to where you can make a living off of it. And sometimes you have to be creative and not so rigid, because you may have a vision in the beginning of like, this is how my success is going to look for me. I'm going to be doing nothing but magazine covers. But then you find a niche in music videos or something, you know what I mean? And then you start finding that you're getting work somewhere else. So you have to adapt and change and not be so rigid in your process.
That is such a good point, because I struggled a lot with my sort of ongoing identity crises throughout the years. And it wasn't until the past year where I decided to kind of innovate in a certain direction that I wasn't thinking about before. Because, like I said, for 7 years I was doing photography from start to development to doing it for money. And I started doing YouTube for fun, just to kind of get away from like industry BS or stress or whatever, to kind of further express myself creatively outside of taking just stills. And like I mentioned before, the whole tinkering, personal interest in things like manufacturing, fabrication, I never told anybody about that. That was something I kept kind of under wraps as a secret, unless I was building a prop for a shoot or something. And then I put out a few videos, and then friends were like, you have a 3D printer? Why? And then there was a video where I was building props for this beauty shoot I did with 2 agency models. And then my friends, when I saw them in person, they said, dude, you were making something out of metal. You were using like an angle grinder. You had all this stuff that we had no idea you did. And they said, you should do more of that. And I was thinking, well, why? Don't you want to see the photos? Like, isn't that something that, photographers would want to see more of? And so the irony is that majority of my audience it was photographers, maybe 90% photographers, like young creative photographers or filmmakers, content creators, whatever. But I would get a lot of DMs saying, hey, when's your next fabrication video or something, from a photographer? Like, you going to build anything for your camera next week? And like, what the heck is going on? Like, you don't want to see photos? What the hell's wrong with you? And so it was just like a really funny thing. So I struggled a lot with that for the past year, because I was thinking, well, if I make more videos on YouTube, shouldn't it be photography tutorials or some kind of guide or how to, something with your camera, or some kind of content about lenses or something? But the kind of proof was in the pudding, and what all the feedback and comments and I guess the views were telling me was that the videos where I was making some kind of weird prism spinner thing for a video shoot I did. They liked that stuff, like that weird kind of creative building process.
Yeah, I think I watched that video this morning where like, you had to make 3 props for a video.
Yeah.
And so, explain it. Well, the one was a prism, and a lot of these things are going to be heavily visual. So I'll link to your work so people can find you who are listening to this. But let's just do our best to describe just those 3 props, because I think it's kind of unique and it gives a little bit more of an idea of the kind of things that you can make and you can get creative with to pull off a different look. And also, like, this is DIY. You're like just pulling tools from, how much money are you spending on these tools, and maybe like get into those 3 that you had made for that specific shoot.
Yeah, there was a guy once who saw a picture of my workshop and he was like, "Oh, you're so lucky. Wish I had all those power tools in that workshop." And I said, well, I had to sell maybe 80% of my camera gear to get the workshop, because I had to sell that money and then use it to, buy a metal lathe and like a 3D printer and all these things. So I want to say I have, I don't know how much money exactly. It's probably a lot, but probably just as much as anybody would spend on kind of like a whole plethora of camera gear.
Yeah.
You just buy, industrial machines or something.
But I mean, I'm more specifically, like when you're looking, I guess that's one thing that I didn't think about, is that those tools, 3D printers, are very expensive. But like when you were creating those 3 props.
Oh, I see.
It seems like you're just like pulling supplies, and it's very, it's, you know what I mean? It didn't seem like it was that expensive to make those things.
Those weren't expensive, no. But I definitely had a lot of those materials just sitting around from like previous projects that I didn't use. So a lot of that was I think what did I use? I used plywood. I think a sheet of plywood, a 2x4, like just a cut of a 2x4, and then what else? What else did I make? I mean, the prism spinner.
There was a prism spinner,
air cannon thing.
The cannon, which actually, so it blew out the dust. Was it sand?
Like color powder, pink color powder or something.
Yeah, like I think people have seen those kind of videos online where just.
Oh yeah, and then I casted this, like I shattered a bunch of glass and put it instead of a PVC tube, and then casted this resin crystal thingy.
Yeah.
That wasn't that expensive.
But it's just like super creative.
Oh, I see.
And it's just the idea behind it is that some people, you know what I mean? These are cool little tricks that, especially when you're on a budget, can be very helpful to manipulate the frame to make
definitely.
what you want.
Yeah, I feel like as creatives, photographers, filmmakers, whatever, I almost want to promote this kind of, not necessarily to the extreme fabrication stuff that I'm doing, but just DIY mindset in general, because I think that it's kind of getting lost in the consumerism. A lot of people are like trying to buy new things, lenses, cameras, whatever. It's all about the new tech coming out. Although I love technology, I'm such a huge advocate of new tech and utilizing it for creative needs. I do think that this whole do-it-yourself, you know what, I'm going to make it happen no matter what kind of mindset is really important for people who are sort of in photography or filmmaking or content creation, because ultimately it's like we talked about before. There might be a weed whacker or some kind of wind or some sort of insane environmental hazard or something that happens, and then you kind of have to innovate your way out of it. It's like Steve Jobs said,
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm lighting this right now with a paper lantern that costs $30 on Amazon, and it produces, like, you can compare it to $1,000 light and say, well, yeah, the $1,000 light, it definitely doesn't have a greenish tint to it, and maybe it's a little bit softer, but like at the end of the day, they're 2 different things.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can get even close with a $30 light to a $1,000 light is massive. And I think it's something that you can't forget when you've gotten to a certain point. Because like if you're a creative and then all of a sudden now you're working on these really high budget projects and maybe you're trying to help young people, it's not always helpful. It's helpful to keep in mind that there is a way to make this happen for much less. And that's... You're right, though, with the consumerism, is that people are, you see it, like every time a new camera comes out, everybody has to do a review on it. Everybody has to get their hands on it. And, the A7 III came out, and everybody's getting rid of their A7 R2s and A7 S2s because it's got a better XYZ. And I was like, my cameras that I have now, like these are just fine. I got them a year and a half ago, and they still work just as fine for the purposes that I need them. And maybe there will come a time when I've worn the camera down enough, or I'm ready to sell it, and the new features make the difference.
Yeah.
But you have to be very thoughtful about the new features, and is it really making the difference at the end of the day?
Oh, I have a good story. So Do you know that camera brand? Oh, I don't want to actually. I shouldn't say it.
Yeah, let's say X camera brand.
It's a big medium format camera brand.
Yeah.
And there's only like two, so it's got to be one or the other. But I'm not going to say which one. In 2014 or 13, I had a shoot that I was doing with silver body paint, and the whole idea that I had, it was very avant-garde. This wasn't for a client; it was for like a portfolio kind of personal shoot. I had 3 models or dancers, and then the idea was to paint them silver, like have silver chrome body paint, and then I made these 3 props like just shapes, and they were also painted silver, and so they were kind of interacting with those shapes and sort of mimicking those shapes during the shoot. And Profoto, actually, one of the reps, he sponsored me lights for that project. And so I did, I think, maybe that shoot and another one. And on the second shoot, or maybe it was that one actually, the camera that I had, I think it was like an older Canon, like 1DS Mark II or 1DS Mark III or something. One of the first, full frame digital cameras for Canon. It wasn't working with a Profoto trigger for some strange reason. Like it wasn't triggering right.
Can you for the layman's out there,
Yeah.
and also for me, because I'm not big into photography.
Oh, okay.
Well, one, can you explain what a medium format camera is?
It's just imagine the cameras that you use now, like a DSLR, but way more hefty, a lot bigger. Their sensors like that big,
Massive sensor,
giant sensor. So the depth of field that you get from those cameras is so shallow to the point where it's just insane. You move a hair and then everything is so blurry, but in a good way, because you have such massive depth from that sensor and so much color information, so much information in the shadows and the highlights that you can bring back anything if you want.
So the size of the sensor has something to do with the depth of field. I didn't know that. I thought it was just based on the f-stop.
F-stop contributes to it. F-stop allows more light to get in there, and also, it contributes to the depth of field that you get, whether it be shallow or a lot more deep, I guess. But those larger format, film. I'm not a film guy, but the larger format, like film cameras, way back when, it was a similar deal. That's why a lot of them have like really, really precise, manufactured bellow ways and everything, so they can crank it. And so when it gets to a certain point, then they stop. And there was a lot more meticulous back then. But then with medium format cameras, because the sensor's so big, it does contribute a lot to the depth of field.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, and then you also said there was the clicker thing. What was the with the Canon camera?
Okay, their trigger to make the flashes go off wasn't working on my camera, which was like an older Canon back then. So because of that, I was like, holy crap, I got to pull out my very, very, very first DSLR, my Canon T1i, which came out in like 2009 or 2008. It was a super old Rebel camera, a really tiny thing. And for some reason, it was working on there. I just did the whole shoot with that little tiny Canon Rebel, like one of the first 2 Canon Rebels ever. And I think probably now you can buy one for like $100 or $200 or something like that. It's super cheap. Then a few months down the line, one of the medium format companies, because they weren't involved up to this point. Later on, one of the medium format camera companies, a rep called me, and he said, "Hey, Daniel, this is so-and-so from this company, and I really love your website. What medium format were you using for that shot on your website? Because it became, the photo from that shoot became the like the header image." And I said, "Medium format? I don't use medium format." I said, "I would love one, but I don't have one." And he said, "Oh, I thought you were shooting medium format. I mean, that image looks amazing on that front page." I said, "Dude, that's a Canon Rebel T1i." And I was just thinking, this guy should get fired. but besides that, I was just it hit me that even somebody who's a representative of this giant sort of, this insanely prestigious camera company, he thought I was using like a medium format camera because maybe the lighting techniques or like just the way they were posing, or it made it look kind of high quality, or I have no idea. But that was one of the points that made me think that gear isn't that important. It's important, but only to a point. And so everything beyond that, like the DIY, the props that we made, the silver body paint, the content that we put into that video, was really what made him gravitate towards calling me. It wasn't necessarily the quality of the image. or like the file. It was the quality of like the content inside of it.
Well, you have the one thing is somebody who's a professional in the space, and now he may not be a photographer, but he's somebody who looks at these photos all day, and
Sure.
he should know. He knows quality when he sees it. Period. He may not be able to pick out the camera. Just as a wine connoisseur, may not be able to tell like this $1,000 wine bottle
Yeah.
versus a $20 bottle.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. But then he is somebody who's kind of like an expert in this space, but the people that we're creating for oftentimes aren't the photographers or the filmmakers. It's, if I'm going to make a movie, like a 15-minute documentary, unless it's about film and the filmmaking process,
Yeah.
it's going to be for people who don't have that same eye.
Totally.
So what can you actually get away with? And I think you can get away with a lot more than you think.
I think I made a video about that point a while back. I called it the photographer's paradox, just for fun. And that was actually the same point, was that other photographers and filmmakers, content creators, whatever, they're not paying our bills. It's the clients that we shoot for. It's a lot of times the normal consumers, because either you're shooting B2B, like business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. And I've had so many creative directors, art directors, whatever, who they're like, I don't really care about which light you use. I just want to have a good photo, And they're not really concerned with if you use Broncolor or, Pro Photo or, or a medium format camera or something.
Here's the one thing.
Those lights are amazing, but again, relative to the quality that the client wants.
What I will say though, it depends on your relationship with the client, but a lot of times if you are moving into the higher end space, I wouldn't bring a paper light. I wouldn't bring a paper lantern to a professionally paid shoot, to a corporate shoot. I've only done it one time, and it's because we had to take these tiny cargo planes, and it was like really bootstrap, and it was like under that expectation that, hey, we can't fit a massive light kit here, so we're going to bring this one.
Yeah.
But for, if it's professional shoot, if it's client paid, if it's higher end, so there is something to say about looking professional and having the gear. The thing though is that most people, if you go into a corporate shoot, unless like they really have been on 100 shoots before, but a lot of times I might be working with a startup company that it's their first time hiring video, like we don't even know what to charge, and you have to like figure out, is it worth it to rent out the red camera on that when they won't know the difference between a C200 and you could get just as good quality. I don't want to say just as good, but to the point that nobody would notice the difference. The client would not notice the difference.
Yeah, and I think that the tolerance for that is getting a lot broader nowadays, because attention spans are decreasing significantly. I mean, even I myself, I can't find myself on Instagram scrolling through without just completely swiping over maybe 30 photos. And I think if this were 10 years ago and I had access to all these images in the palm of my hand, I would have been cherishing them like crazy, just analyzing every detail on those images. It's not just me per se, but I think a lot of people, like the next generation, millennial, Gen X, whatever, they definitely are being conditioned to kind of not necessarily look at all the details that we might have when we first started, So I think that, maybe they're not your clients, but I think that tolerance is definitely getting a lot more flexible. Yeah.
Is there less of an appreciation of,
I think so,
of the crafts, I guess, of photography and filmmaking, because it's so prevalent, because you open up your phone.
Yeah.
I think there's also more access. Like you have access to, you could, if you wanted to, follow the top 100. Not that it's an impossible thing to quantify, but you could find 100 amazing photographers who are world class, follow them, and that's in your newsfeed every day. You almost become desensitized to it when you see so much beauty.
That's a good word. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an appropriate way to describe it, because it's like with anything. If somebody, like, say you really love candy, and there was a guy in the corner of your street who was handing out free candy every single week, every Sunday, 9 a.m. And you go there for the first 2 weeks and you're like, oh, free candy, amazing. And by like the third month, you're kind of thinking, okay, no more, please. I kind of had my fill, too much access to it. I kind of want to break, actually, from having so much sugar and candy. So similarly with content creation and, whether it be YouTube videos or Instagram posts or whatever, I think that definitely people are becoming a bit desensitized to the content that's out there, and also the access, the idea of having access to these things.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest detriment to our well-being, though, would probably be the comparison. Is because, for one, we're desensitized to it a little bit, or at least, but mainly you're looking at it and being like, damn, like that photo is amazing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you see photos from all over the world, all these amazing locations with the best lighting and the most, medium format, beautiful cameras, and you compare yourself to every one of those photos.
Yeah.
You compare yourself to the best versions of everybody else, and it can, I think, hurt your well-being, to where this is a new thing. We're talking about it, I think, quite a lot these days. It's the role of social media and how it plays in our life. But I think we need to talk about it, and we need to really think about our relationship with it. And that's why I've been experimenting with like social media detoxes and just taking a break from social media for just say, okay, 30 days. I'm not going to go on social media for 30 days. Let me see how I'm going to feel. How is that going to change my behavior and my overall well-being? And you notice in the first couple days that you pull up your phone, and then, or I'll go to my computer and I'll open up the browser and just start typing in Twitter. So TWITT, and I'm like, oh shit, I can't go on Twitter. But then if you think about a behavior like that, and you go down that rabbit hole, where does that lead me? It leads me to browsing the internet, seeing other creators, seeing other people making stuff, seeing other people who are, saying really funny things, which there's a place for that, right? There's inspiration that can be found in that.
Right.
But I don't think it helps you be a better creator or a filmmaker or a photographer.
Yeah. It kind of depends on a person's personality type and character type. In my opinion, I mean, I've been taking a break, like you just said, from Instagram, and I feel great. I think I started maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And by the third day, I was like, oh, I didn't die. My phone, just because I'm not opening it, isn't going to kill me. And it's nice to have that reminder every once in a while, because I don't think that, I think Instagram and all this access to the content is amazing for people who constantly crave inspiration, and they're not concerned with other people's lives, right? They're kind of concerned about just getting the inspiration they need and then taking off and then making something. But I think Instagram can be a little bit bad. It can be kind of bad for people who are neurotic, think a lot, have a lot of anxiety, slightly depressed. I'm definitely neurotic. I think a lot. So if I see all these posts and everything, it'll kind of trigger like a certain thought process or memory or something. I don't know, and in comparisons too. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of just want to get off of Instagram. That's why I'm not too involved. I try to post and then just kind of get off of it. But definitely, like you're saying, it can sort of be kind of bad for people who maybe think a lot too.
I think that I'm so glad that you said that, because sometimes I get into this phase of overgeneralizing things. Because if I even look at my partner, Natalie, she doesn't have this. She's like, I don't have that same kind of thing with social media, where like I and it's crazy because I will look at her feed, and I don't know if you've ever done this, like just scroll through somebody else's feed. It's like an alien planet. You're like, who are these people? And she's just following all these celebrities and all these makeup brands and clothing brands, and she's definitely not a minimalist at all. And I'm like, do you feel yourself like comparing yourself to these people and feeling like bad when you look at it? She's like, no, I enjoy looking at this stuff, and she doesn't, for whatever reason, she's just wired a little bit differently. Yeah. Where for me, I feel like it starts to nag at me a little bit more, even it's not even subconscious. I see the thoughts popping in my head.
Yeah.
Where
Sometimes
I'm like,
audibly you'll say something like, ugh, this person.
Yeah.
Always posing naked. Come on.
Yeah. Like, come on.
So I took a break for a while from Instagram for the past, month or something, a few weeks. And then, but maybe like a couple times a day, I'll just open it to see like the first post and then get off. Just because I know subconsciously I'll go on Instagram, but then I try to talk myself out of it. And then I think it was probably yesterday, I went on Instagram and I was like, whatever, I'm kind of bored. Click, I went on Instagram. First picture that showed up on the main feed was like this guy who was naked and his thigh was covering his crotch. And I'm like, never mind. Got off Instagram.
Like, all right.
But I'm totally that guy. I think that it's like we're saying, people are wired differently. Sometimes I just can't relate. It's like, oh, I love all the inspiration. It's so amazing. And I never compare myself to other people. And I'm thinking, I envy you, because I feel like I do that a little bit too much. And question, so is your girlfriend, is she creative like you?
She has gotten more. Her skill set has gotten more creative recently. So she's in strategy. So
Okay.
she'll kind of figure out how to. You got a TV show or a movie. It's like, how do we position this in the market?
Oh, so she's strategist.
Yeah.
So she's probably a bit more left-brained. Like she's very, again, strategic.
It's very problem-solving heavy.
Yeah, problem solver.
Yeah.
Probably very good with not just innovating problems, but then staying focused and linear thinking, I guess. Whereas hyper creative people, like maybe yourself and I, get very neurotic because we're always thinking about ideas and what other people are up to and how we can cross-reference that with what we're doing. And so I think that that's a big reason why I think a lot and why I have anxiety with Instagram. It's because I'm hyper creative, can't turn it off.
Right.
I can't control it.
There's a part of it that needs to be tamed and controlled and quieted through meditation or long walks or going to the gym.
Yeah.
And then there's a part of it where it almost can act as fuel. Because I don't think if I had that kind of nagging feeling, the desire to create and to get moving, I feel like then maybe I wouldn't make any. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's the kick in the ass. And even when you're first starting out and you have no money and you feel like overwhelmed because you're so far from where you want to be, that kind of drive, even though it's from a lack of having, I think pushes you forward to achieve and to get where you want to go.
I personally always felt like motivation is born from fire and inspiration is born from a place of tears and maybe anxiety or depression or neurosis, like you're saying, a place where you kind of feel like you want to get things done and you feel overwhelmed with all this stimuli that you eventually just do it, you know? And so I guess for me, it's actually really hard for me to find inspiration. It's really hard. I don't know why. But it's definitely not on Instagram. So I have to go to the beach or like have a conversation with somebody. And a lot of times that's where I'll find the inspiration. It's from like hearing a story, you know, and then it's like I said before, like the inspiration will come from something that they've been through. And then I'm like, oh, I have this cool idea for a video, you know? But just saying all the stimuli, all of like the positive PR for other people, it kind of comes down to comparing yourself to other people, which I hate doing that. You know?
Yeah, it actually did remind me of something that The Rock said in one of these inspirational YouTube clips. And actually, now that I mentioned The Rock,
you want to have him on the podcast, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that, but I have to play the jingle.
Yeah, he's cool.
I didn't have it queued up, but I have a jingle here.
Is it like a rock song?
Yeah, it's actually a jingle that one of my listeners made.
Hey, The Rock, don't be impolite, accept Matt's invite to do the Ground Up Show.
And that's Sam Tier.
Yeah,
Sam Tier made
song.
that jingle. He won the Get the Rock on Matt's podcast jingle competition. So I had a competition. A lot of people submitted, and Sam Tier won. So basically, anytime I mention The Rock on the podcast, I have to bring that up. That was one of the first times that I've done it. But to The Rock, he said that he was giving like this talk to, I think, whatever, it was like a young group of football players or whatever, and he was like, whenever I go into the first day of filming or a big meeting or anything, because like even though he's The Rock, he still is in places where he is overwhelmed, intimidated, a little bit hesitant and unsure of himself.
Wow.
And he says he pictures himself when he was just starting out, when he had $7 to his name, when he had nothing, and the kind of drive, and he pulls from those same kind of emotions.
Yeah.
Whether neuro-linguistic programming, whatever it is, it's imagining yourself back at that place, putting yourself in those shoes, and then it helps to drive and fire you up. And I think that's kind of part of the reason, like, to make the podcast too, like we were talking about before the show, is that to never forget where you came from and to always remember that.
So good. Yeah.
It fires you up, man. It makes you excited for it. And it's the saddest thing to see people who have, quote unquote, made it, have gotten to this certain point, and then they forget about everybody. They forget about where they came from. They're in their high castle, and they're no longer connected to the rest of the world.
It would be incredible, though, if you had... I was just thinking this whole time... I was kind of dozing off, imagining The Rock just sitting right here.
Dude, like, I think of that quite often.
That'd be crazy.
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because as far as I get into this, the further I get, the better it is, because I think it just sounds better. That I've been trying to get The Rock on my podcast for 10 years. 10 years!
It's going to happen, though.
I don't know, though. A lot, people keep saying it's going to happen, and it's
at least a goal to shoot for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you're at least on his radar. So I'm wondering if he's just trying to... if he's just not trying to put it out there in case he gets too busy to do it, last second. Because I'm sure he's doing a million things in one day. But I have a feeling he's probably thought about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a website for it.
Yeah. I've got a rap battle going on now with Lewis Howes.
Oh my God.
Because Lewis Howes is... Do you know Lewis Howes?
No, I don't.
Okay, he's like a very big, prominent podcaster.
But I'm imagining you rapping.
Yeah, no, it's not an actual rap battle, but
Okay.
you know how rappers have beef with each other?
Yeah.
It's
like diss tracks.
Yeah. Although he's not playing the game. I'm like dissing him. I'm not really dissing him, but we he tweeted out like, who wants to see The Rock on my podcast? Because he's trying to get The Rock on his podcast.
Oh man.
So now it's on. Now I feel like the pressure's on.
Well, you got the website.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm ahead. Do you have any crazy, ambitious ideas like a Rock type vision where it's like, oh, I really want to, and it may not be as specific, but it may be, I would really love to create this or make this in the future.
Well, one thing I have always wanted to do, again, this is kind of pertaining to sort of the theme of my YouTube channel, which is building camera rigs and everything, I guess, for what I'm doing. I would love to engineer and manufacture in my garage a 6-axis robot arm, just like we were talking about earlier, because those things are just a huge thing, like a big undertaking. I would love to probably start a new business in the next, year or two.
From your perspective of being inside the kind of creator fabrication kind of world, does it seem like you could create an innovative new product, something that would be really kind of cool and clever, that would be useful for filmmakers? Or because from my perspective, I would never even be able to conjure up that idea, but it seems like you're tinkering with these cool concepts that could potentially come to the market and be valuable. Are there any ideas like that you think that you could see where you could create something?
So in the timeline of when I went from, the whole almost dying accident thing to becoming a photographer and then secretly getting into building stuff, I didn't really get serious about it until maybe 3-4 years ago. And then, so when I moved to my apartment, me and this girl broke up, and then I bought a 3D printer, and I had an idea for a product that I wanted to make, and I had one for the photography industry, one for a different industry. It was actually like fitness stuff, but I didn't really like where either of them was going. So, and then I just kept making stuff. And so when I made videos about them, it kind of ended up turning into this thing on YouTube where it's like I fell in love with the process of making things. Whereas before it wasn't that serious, but it was just something I was doing for fun.
Are you very goal oriented? Like, do goals drive you to say, I want to accomplish this? Or are you more the type that lets the kind of inspiration guide them in the moment?
I do the latter in individual projects. So when I'm making a video or something, I'll kind of let it flow and take its natural course. Like I'll storyboard it, but then transitions, like where I do voiceovers, how I edit things, I'll kind of just let that free flow. But I am very goal oriented. So when I first started trying to be a photographer full time, that was like my dream. That was like the biggest thing I wanted to do. I didn't care how much money I made or where I lived or what it took. I just wanted to do that. And so, again, I just did whatever it took. I worked, my way up from being, not saying you have to work your way up, but I started being, an assistant photographer and a retoucher to being like production artist to shooting inside that same company, inside their studio here and there. And then I built a portfolio of images I was shooting for myself outside of work. And then I moved to LA, and then I just kept doing more of that and then getting more work, I guess. So
isn't it amazing how impossible it feels in the beginning? Like it really does. When you're getting started out, you're like, if I could just make a living doing it. Realistically, there are so many people that make a living doing photography or filmmaking that it's way more possible than you think. And I think the hardest thing is just figuring out first steps. Is just figuring out when you have no opportunities very early on, you have to kind of create them. And I think that's what you did with even just picking up a camera. I mean, that's always one thing you can do is actually just start the craft, no matter if you are going in your backyard and taking photos or if you're, working with other people and trying to find talent and models and make it that way. But then it's also about finding the opportunities, about finding the job posting, whether it's working at your school or working with a professional photographer.
You almost have to be a bit of an opportunist and be willing to sacrifice a lot of the things that you care about, just to make that one thing happen. And, it's the way I measure things like love is how much sacrifices you're making. So if you love something that much, you would have probably made more sacrifices to make it work out. And if I hear about a person who like moved to a different country and they quit their job from their old country, and then they're working at, a restaurant, and they're shooting every single weekend, et cetera, I know that person probably cares a lot about what they're doing. And I want to say that I was kind of a version of that when I was pursuing photography. I would work a 9 to 5, then I would get home, and then I'd work some more until 2 a.m. And then I'd sleep and then get 4 hours of sleep. 4 hours of sleep, wake up at 6 a.m. and go back to 9 to 5, which is an hour and a half drive away. And yeah, that was just my life for like 6 months. I remember at one point, 4 hours of sleep every single night. It was pretty bad.
Is it true that you have to sacrifice more in the beginning? That in the beginning, it may be a bit more of a grind.
Yeah.
Because once you've established yourself, right? Because in those times you're not making a really a livable wage, right? You're making a few bucks an hour, and you're just trying to get by.
Yeah.
And the only spare time you have, if you really want to make it as a creative, you need to devote to that craft. So there are a lot of sacrifices early on, and you can't get around it. And I think it's just kind of fairy fluff to say that you can just follow your inspiration and you know, you can have a balanced life at the very beginning.
Definitely not. I believe that in the very beginning, the sacrifices are more severe, and the balancing is going to be way more tipped over, because you're doing one thing, and you're starting from the very, like, maybe that one thing, maybe it's a day job or something, you're right here, and the thing you're trying to start is all the way down here. So you making that jump, it's like jumping off a super tall ass ladder, you know, and then you're hoping that your legs don't break. And that sacrifice is kind of huge in the very beginning, because that transition's gigantic. But I guess as you develop the high-paying skills, that ratio evens out a little bit more. So if you wanted to go back to a day job, you could. If you want to quit that day job, you still have those high-paying skills that you developed after you already made that first jump in the very beginning.
Sacrifices don't go away, though.
But they don't.
You're always going to have to sacrifice something, because you can't do everything.
There's always going to be sacrifices. But I think somebody who's kind of new in like filmmaking or photography or something, who has kind of no skills yet, they got to make a huge sacrifice time-wise too. And also money-wise, because maybe they don't have a camera themselves, you know, or like any lenses, or maybe they want to be a filmmaker, but they don't have a tripod yet. So it's a lot of financial and also time sacrifices that go into just development, you know.
Are there things today, right, now that you're a full-time photographer, you have a bit more balance in your life, are there certain things that you will not sacrifice? Like, what is so important to you that it's not worth putting off for work?
Well, I won't sacrifice family. That's like a huge thing, because they've always been around since the very beginning. Family never believes in you in the very beginning. they always kind of call you on your bullshit, like, good one, Daniel. You want to be a photographer? Yeah. Try harder. And I mean, they didn't say that to me, but
I always say that. I always say for every motivational guru, there's a sibling rolling their eyes.
Definitely. Yeah. And so, you know, in the very beginning, it's kind of hard just to get the morale behind you, because the family, you can't really expect them. You can't be entitled to their belief in you, because you have to prove yourself. It's like Shark Tank in a way, or like getting an investor. So you kind of have to develop your skills, develop your portfolio or like work history or something, and show them that you have something for them to believe in. So I won't give up family though, because as I developed, they started pushing me even more and more and more, and then showing more support, like visiting me, all that stuff. Won't give up that.
Yeah, and for those that may not have even close family, family doesn't have to be blood. You can also have close friends, intimate partners that are your family.
I wouldn't sacrifice, I guess, my ethics just to, I guess, get any attention I could. You know, like I know that in the creative fields, a lot of it is about who you know, what you've done, kind of like the sauce behind what you're doing. But I just feel like I couldn't give up sort of my ethics that I was brought up with to put out some crazy clickbaity thing that's, I don't know, it generates a lot of views, but it doesn't feel good to make. You know, I want to make something with depth. So I don't want to give up the craftsmanship behind what I do.
There's this common title that I see in videos, especially with filmmakers, is you need this. Like, you need this one thing.
Right.
Every photographer needs this. And it is so clickable. So many people, what do I need? But it really cuts to the most cliche advertising strategy, which is create desire. Make somebody feel like they need something.
Yeah.
And then you open it up and it's like a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And you're like, I don't need that. Like, you don't even know what I'm doing, right? And I think that it's one thing to get excited about new products, and I do as well. And like, it's really fun to play with new lenses and, new sliders, whatever. It's great to get excited about it. And it's also great to share the things that you've gotten value with. But I think that there is a language that's important. And I think, like you said, it's important not to make sensational clickbait titles and posts that are strictly drawn just to drive traffic and not build a deeper connection. And, people might not care, but it doesn't matter, because it's really about like what you feel. You know what I mean? It really matters on your ethics and your principles.
Yeah. There's definitely two halves to that, because I don't want to say most companies, but Dan Locke, this really amazing business kind of marketing guy, he's amazing. He said it a really good way. He said that people don't buy for logic. People use logic to rationalize their emotional purchases. So people purchase something because it makes them feel good, And when people say you need this lens, they're making money off of your inadequacies, because it's making you feel like, if I don't have this, I'm not a good photographer, And that's what we're talking about, kind of like the consumerism spiraling out of control, because a lot of people are making clickbaity things like that to make you feel inadequate if you don't get it. So, and then the other half is people like being addicted to things. I have some people I know who have just this unfathomable amount of photography and video gear. It's ridiculous. Like, you open their closet, probably like 5 C-stands drop on your face or something. Or like 20 lenses just like roll out. Oh, right. Another lens. Sorry about that. But I have some friends who have so much gear and they only apply about 20% of it. And I don't bother trying to talk them out of buying stuff, because I know they like the addiction they get from buying things. It's dopamine. They think about clicking the purchase button. They feel really amazing.
It feels like a problem solved.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like
golden
finally
ticket.
Golden ticket. I got that one thing.
Yeah.
And now all my problems are solved. Everything's going to be easy.
Yeah.
And
we all do this.
We all fall into it. And I don't want people to think that I'm any different than anybody else, because
I'm not different.
Yeah. I'll be like, I've been running around vlogging with a Zeiss 25 millimeter lens. And it's like, it's pretty tight when I'm vlogging and I'm holding the camera to myself at 25 millimeters. And I was like, oh man, I really need that 16 to 35 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting it because in the end, it won me out, where I was like, oh, it's going to help me. And then I'll just have this one lens. And I think it is about just being it's about being very thoughtful about the things that you bring into your life, whether it's a lens, a camera, or clothing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have that same kind of mentality, the 80-20 principle when it comes to clothes. You look in your closet, you only use 20% of your clothes. So why even have the other 80%?
It's ridiculous. I'm trying to be more like you. I'm trying to be minimalist more like you, because I fall into this trap sometimes where it feels almost overwhelming having all these things that, it's like, what if I want to move one day, or what if I want to take off and go on a road trip and have all this stuff to organize, And so what I've been trying to do is I have this this really cool old school kind of brass balancing scale. Mm-hmm. And whenever I buy something, I just put some stuff on there to weigh it down. And I have to walk by that every single day, and it's off balance like this. And when I buy something new, I have to sacrifice something else, throw it away, sell it, put it on Craigslist, something to balance out my life, so that I know that there is a give and take. There's a sacrifice I have to make to get something new.
Wow.
And I mean, it works, because when I see that, I'm like, that bothers me, having a scale that's just like tipped over like that all the time, and you walk by it.
It's amazing that you have an actual physical representation of the balance in your life. Mm-hmm. I think you are like me. That sounds like none of us are perfect, and the idea is that we have to be constantly mindful and thoughtful about these things. And, we make mistakes, and sometimes we get a little bit out of balance.
Yeah.
And it's our job to make sure that we can recalibrate.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with buying stuff as long as you're kind of aware. And also, I think that if you buy something that is solving a problem that's hindering your productivity, then you can buy it. Like you're saying, you can't physically hold your camera here without it being like,
Yeah.
So you have to get a wider lens. It's just inevitable you're going to need one eventually, because otherwise you need a 2-foot long selfie stick, right?
Yeah.
Which no one uses those anymore.
Yeah. I think that is an important thing to mention, is that if it's going to solve a problem, if it's going to help your life a little bit, if it's going to reduce some friction,
right,
then buy it. But not every single product you buy is solving a problem, and it's your job to be honest with yourself. If that's what you want to do,
which is very hard, to be honest with yourself sometimes. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
With the people who are kind of addicted to gear, and again, this is an uncomfortable topic. Not a lot of people like talking about this, but I think the people who are addicted to gear, again, they like being addicted to gear. It's like people who gamble. They will do anything in their power to rationalize gambling. Well, I won last week. I won the 3 weeks before that. I'm going to win this time again. The probability of me winning it's going to happen. And so when people become so good at rationalizing or being addicted to something, they get better at lying to themselves. So if they're not listening to themselves, you can't possibly talk them out of it. So self-awareness is like such a huge thing.
I honestly think that, as cliche as it is, meditation can really help, or just the act of being able to sit still or do simple tasks like read a book.
Right.
Find some hobbies. And I think you have to keep your mind distracted and at bay.
Yeah.
Because we're preset to be just hungry, to fill this void, to gamble. Yeah. Like a lot of us have a very addictive nature, and it may not be everybody, but many of us in our culture are predisposed to want to consume more and more. And
absolutely creative people too, because like I mentioned earlier, I believe that creative people are on the spectrum of people who have more access to their emotions. They like expressing themselves. When they look at art, they're like, I feel how that is representative of the gentrification in San Francisco. It's just like, that's just a dog taking a shit, but sorry. But I think that creatives tend to have more access to their emotions. Even my brother and I, we are complete opposites. And when we're talking about stuff like emotions, he doesn't necessarily, I guess, we don't have a great interaction with that. But if I talk to him about something like a problem I need to solve, or something algorithmic or computer related or philosophically, we definitely jive with that.
If you were to give advice to creatives, people who are just getting started out, what would you tell them?
Creativity is all about perspective. So I think there's a saying that you take two things who aren't normally in the same room together, you put them together, all of a sudden it's a creative new thing. So creativity is relative to kind of the perspective you have. And, me building camera rigs or manufacturing something at home for my camera, the only reason people see that as creative, I don't see it as creative. I see it as something that I got from engineering, or like from craftsmanship, or like metalworking or something like that. So, again, it's a relative thing. If you want to stick out and be seen as creative, try combining what you're doing with like a secret obsession of yours, and you'll probably stand out a little bit.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, dude. Thank you for the very thoughtful conversation. If we want to send people to your work, where should we send them?
So youtube.com/Daniel DeArco. Instagram, Daniel DeArco is my handle. Just my first name, last name. There's also my website, danieldearco.com. But I definitely want to branch off more into like the creative build projects for my camera.
I love that.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Ground Up Show. If you're getting some value from the podcast, you can support the show on Patreon. Every month, I create exclusive videos exploring lifestyle design, minimalism, creativity, and business. These vlogs and AMA podcast episodes, which can be found nowhere else, give a rarely seen look into my work and personal life. Help support the show for the cost of a cup of coffee a week, and get access to all this content at patreon.com/Matt D'Avella. Again, that's patreon.com/Matt D'Avella. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.